The dust cloud behind her was so thick that Violet Kerrigan could taste it on her tongue, gritty and bitter, like the memories she was trying to outrun as her horse galloped toward the settlement ahead, her heart pounding harder than the hooves beneath her. The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly in every direction, a landscape of red rocks and unforgiving sun, and somewhere in that vastness, she hoped to disappear completely. It was late summer in 1878, and the heat shimmered off the desert floor in waves that made the distant buildings of Gila Bend look like a mirage. But Violet knew it was real because she had studied the map until her eyes burned, memorizing every route that would take her far from St. Louis and the life she had destroyed. Her mare, a chestnut named Ruby, was exhausted, foam flecking her neck, but they had to make it to town before nightfall. Violet had been riding for weeks, stopping only when absolutely necessary, sleeping with one eye open, always listening for the sound of pursuit. The money she had taken was hidden in a leather pouch beneath her bodice, pressing against her ribs with every breath, a constant reminder of what she had done. It was not stealing, she told herself for the 1,000th time. It was survival. Her stepfather had owed her that much after what he had done to her mother, after the years of cruelty and manipulation, after he had tried to marry her off to his business partner, a man 3 times her age with a reputation for violence. Gila Bend emerged from the heat haze gradually, taking shape as a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with a few outlying structures scattered in the desert beyond. It was smaller than she had hoped, but larger than she had feared, the kind of place where a woman traveling alone might attract attention, but where questions were not always asked if you kept your head down and your business to yourself. Violet slowed Ruby to a walk as they entered the town, her eyes scanning the street for a livery stable and somewhere she might find lodging. The town was more active than she expected for the late afternoon hour. A stagecoach stood outside what appeared to be a general store, passengers disembarking with travel-worn faces. Cowboys lounged outside a saloon, their spurs catching the sunlight, and a woman in a faded calico dress swept the boardwalk in front of a boarding house. Violet felt their eyes on her as she passed, taking in her dusty traveling clothes, and the way she sat her horse with the exhaustion of someone who had ridden too far too fast. The livery stable was at the far end of town, a weathered structure with a hand-painted sign that read, "Holly's Livery and Blacksmith." Violet dismounted carefully, her legs stiff from days in the saddle, and led Ruby through the wide doors into the blessed shade of the barn. The smell of hay and horses was comforting, familiar, a piece of normalcy in the chaos her life had become. "Help you, miss." The voice came from the shadows, deep and measured, and Violet turned to see a man emerge from one of the stalls. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He wore work pants and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms tanned and muscled from physical labor. There was a smudge of soot on his jaw, suggesting he had been at the forge, and he wiped his hands on a rag as he approached. "My horse needs care," Violet said, her voice rougher than she intended. "Water, feed, a good rub-down. She has been ridden hard." The man's gaze shifted to Ruby, and his expression softened with concern. He ran a hand along the mare's neck, assessing her condition with the practiced eye of someone who understood horses. "I can see that," he said, not unkindly. "She is a fine animal. Deserves better than to be run into the ground." The criticism stung, even though Violet knew it was fair. "I had no choice," she said defensively. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Violet fought the urge to turn away from that steady gaze. "Everyone has choices," he said. But sometimes the alternatives are worse than the road we are on. I will take good care of her. Name is Harrison Xavier. I run this place." "Violet," she said, then hesitated, wondering if she should have given a false name. But it was too late now, and something about this man made her think he would see through a lie anyway. "Miss Violet," Harrison acknowledged with a slight nod. "You planning to stay in Gila Bend long?" "I do not know yet," she admitted. "Is there somewhere I can find a room, Mrs.?" "Chen runs the boarding house back up the street. Clean rooms, decent food. Tell her I sent you." He was already leading Ruby toward a stall, moving with an easy confidence that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin, sure of his place in the world. Violet envied him that certainty. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how tired she was, how much she wanted to lie down on a real bed and sleep without listening for danger. "What do I owe you?" Harrison named a price that seemed fair, and Violet counted out the coins from a small purse she kept separate from her hidden money. Their fingers brushed as she handed over the payment, and she felt a spark of something she could not name, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. "Ruby will be ready whenever you need her," Harrison said. "But if you are asking my opinion, she could use a few days' rest before you ride out again." Violet nodded, though part of her insisted she should keep moving, that staying anywhere too long was dangerous. But Ruby did need rest, and so did she. A few days would not matter. She could afford to breathe for a moment before deciding her next move. The boarding house was exactly as Harrison had described, a 2-story building with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Chen was a small woman with sharp eyes and an accent that spoke of origins far from Arizona. But she asked no questions beyond whether Violet wanted a room with a window and how long she planned to stay. Violet paid for a week in advance and climbed the stairs to a small but clean room that overlooked the street. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of everything she had done. The room smelled of lye soap and lavender, and the bed was covered with a worn but clean quilt. Violet removed her boots and lay down fully clothed, intending to rest for just a moment. But exhaustion claimed her immediately, dragging her down into a sleep so deep that she did not even dream. When she woke, the light coming through the window had changed to the softer gold of evening, and her stomach was reminding her that she had not eaten since breakfast, and that had been only hardtack and jerky consumed while riding. Violet stood and examined herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman on the run, with shadows under her eyes and dust in her hair. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, then tried to make herself presentable with the limited supplies in her saddlebags. Mrs. Chen had mentioned that dinner was served at 6 o'clock in the dining room downstairs, and Violet made her way there to find several other boarders already seated at a long table. They were a mixed group, a couple who appeared to be traveling through, a prospector with weathered hands and hopeful eyes, and a school teacher newly arrived to take a position at the local school. The conversation was polite and general, and Violet was grateful that no one pressed her for details about her own circumstances. The food was simple but good, stew with vegetables and fresh bread, and Violet ate until her stomach was satisfied, feeling some of her strength return. After dinner, she excused herself and stepped out onto the porch, needing air and space after weeks of constant vigilance. The street was quieter now, though lights glowed in the saloon windows and she could hear the faint sound of a piano playing. She was standing there, breathing in the cooling evening air, when she saw Harrison Xavier walking down the street toward her. He had cleaned up since the afternoon, changed into fresh clothes, and removed the soot from his face. He moved with a long, easy stride that spoke of confidence without arrogance, and when he saw her on the porch, he tipped his hat. "Miss Violet," he said, pausing at the bottom of the steps. "Settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you," she replied. "And thank you for the recommendation. Mrs. Chen has been very kind." "She is good people," Harrison agreed. "Most folks in Gila Bend are once you get to know them. We look out for each other out here." Violet felt a pang of longing for that kind of community, that sense of belonging somewhere. She had not had that in St. Louis, not really. Her mother had died when Violet was 17, and after her stepfather had taken control of everything, life had become a series of locked doors and impossible demands. She was 22 now, old enough to make her own choices, but it had taken desperation to finally give her the courage to run. "You are from back east," Harrison said, and it was not quite a question. "I can hear it in your voice." "St. Louis," Violet admitted, then wished she had not. The less anyone knew about her, the safer she would be. If Harrison noticed her hesitation, he did not comment on it. "Long way from home," he said. "What brings you all the way to Arizona territory?" "I needed a change," Violet said carefully. "Sometimes you have to leave everything behind to find out who you really are." Harrison studied her for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see more than she wanted to reveal. "That is true enough," he said finally. "I came out here for similar reasons myself about 5 years ago. Boston did not suit me anymore." "Boston?" Violet was surprised. He seemed so much a part of this place, so perfectly fitted to the desert and the hard work of the livery. "My father wanted me to go into law," Harrison explained, leaning against the porch railing with an easy casualness. "Had my whole life planned out before I was old enough to have opinions of my own. But I wanted to work with my hands, build things, take care of animals, so I came west and never looked back." "Do you regret it?" Violet asked, genuinely curious. Harrison shook his head. "Not for a minute. Out here, you are what you make of yourself, not what your family name says you should be. I like that freedom." Violet understood that sentiment more than she could say. "It must be nice," she said softly. "It can be," Harrison agreed, "though it is not always easy. The desert does not forgive mistakes, and you have to be tougher than you think you are just to survive. But if you can manage it, there is nowhere else like it." They talked for a while longer, about nothing in particular and everything that mattered, the kind of conversation that flowed naturally between two people who understood what it meant to start over. Harrison told her about Gila Bend, about the people who lived there and the challenges of running a business in such a remote location. Violet found herself relaxing in his presence, the constant tension she had carried for weeks easing just slightly. Eventually, Harrison tipped his hat again and said he should let her get some rest. "If you need anything while you are in town, you know where to find me," he said. "The livery is open from dawn until dark most days." "Thank you," Violet said and meant it. There was something solid about Harrison Xavier, something trustworthy, and in her current situation, that was more valuable than gold. She went to bed that night feeling safer than she had in months, though she still wedged a chair under the door handle before climbing under the covers. Old habits died hard, and she was not foolish enough to think she was completely safe just because she had put distance between herself and St. Louis. The next morning, Violet woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of the town coming to life below. She dressed and went downstairs for breakfast, where Mrs. Chen served eggs and bacon with strong coffee. The school teacher, whose name was Abigail, invited Violet to walk with her to see the town, and Violet agreed, thinking it would be useful to learn the layout of the place. Gila Bend was larger than it had appeared yesterday, spreading out in unexpected directions once you got off the main street. There was a church, a doctor's office, a small newspaper, and several businesses that served the ranchers and farmers in the surrounding area. Abigail pointed out the school building, a modest structure at the edge of town, and talked enthusiastically about her plans for teaching the local children. As they walked, Violet noticed Harrison outside his livery, working at the forge. He had a piece of iron heating in the fire, and as she watched, he pulled it out with tongs and began hammering it into shape on an anvil. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal was almost musical, and there was something mesmerizing about the way he worked, completely focused on what he was creating. He looked up and saw them watching and raised a hand in greeting. Violet waved back, feeling her cheeks warm for reasons that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "He is a good man," Abigail said quietly. "Harrison helped me move my things into the boarding house when I arrived last month, would not take a penny for it. Said that was just what neighbors did." Violet filed that information away, adding it to the picture she was building of Harrison Xavier. Everything she learned about him suggested that her first impression had been accurate, that he was someone worth knowing, someone who could be trusted. They continued their walk, and Abigail introduced Violet to several of the shopkeepers. Word had apparently already spread that there was a new woman in town, and while people were curious, they were also respectful, not pushing for information Violet was not willing to share. She bought a few supplies at the general store, including a new shirt and a skirt that fit better than the travel-worn clothes she had been living in for weeks. When she returned to the boarding house, there was a moment of panic when she saw a man in a suit talking to Mrs. Chen in the front parlor. Her first thought was that someone had found her, that her stepfather had sent someone to drag her back to St. Louis. But as she got closer, she realized the man was too old, too soft around the middle, to be any kind of threat. He was the banker, Mrs. Chen explained, discussing a loan for some improvements to the building. Violet excused herself and went upstairs, her heart still racing. She needed to be more careful to not jump at shadows. But it was hard to relax when she knew that what she had done could land her in serious trouble if she was caught. Taking money from her stepfather might have been morally justified in her mind, but the law would not see it that way. She would be labeled a thief, and women who stole from their families did not fare well in court. That afternoon, she decided to check on Ruby. The walk to the livery gave her something to do, a purpose beyond sitting in her room and worrying. Harrison was working on a wagon wheel when she arrived, replacing a broken spoke with practiced efficiency. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and made something in her chest tighten. "Come to see your girl?" he asked, setting down his tools and wiping his hands. "I wanted to make sure she was all right," Violet said. "She is doing fine. Come see for yourself." He led her back to the stalls where Ruby was contentedly munching hay. The mare looked better already, her coat brushed and shining, her eyes bright. Violet ran her hand along Ruby's neck, feeling the solid warmth of the animal, the simple comfort of a creature that asked for nothing more than food and kindness. "You have done well with her," Violet said. "Thank you." "It is my job," Harrison said, but there was pride in his voice. "Though I will admit, I do love what I do. Every horse is different, has its own personality. Ruby here is smart and brave. You can see it in the way she carries herself. She has gotten me through some hard times," Violet said quietly. Harrison looked at her with those perceptive eyes. "Seems like maybe you have been through more than your share of those." Violet tensed, wondering how much to say, how much to trust. "Everyone has their struggles," she said evasively. "That is true," Harrison agreed, "but some people carry burdens that are not their own to bear." I have learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set those burdens down and walk away." His words hit closer to home than he could possibly know. "Is that what you did?" Violet asked. "When you left Boston?" "In a way," Harrison said. "I was carrying the weight of my father's expectations, trying to be someone I was not. It was crushing me slowly, making me into a bitter, angry person. Coming west gave me a chance to figure out who I really was, what I wanted from life. Best decision I ever made. Do you ever miss it?" "Your family, the life you left behind." Harrison considered the question. "I miss my mother sometimes. She understood, even if she could not say so out loud. My father and I have not spoken since I left, and I have made my peace with that. You cannot live your life for other people, Violet. At some point, you have to choose yourself. Choose yourself." The words resonated in a way that made Violet's eyes sting with unshed tears. That was exactly what she had done when she ran, even if the choice had been wrapped in fear and desperation. She had chosen herself over her stepfather's plans, over the marriage that would have destroyed her, over a life that was not really living. "I should let you get back to work," she said, her voice not quite steady. Harrison seemed to sense that he had touched on something tender. "You are welcome here anytime," he said. "If you want to visit Ruby, or if you just need someone to talk to, I am a pretty good listener." "Thank you," Violet said, and this time she met his eyes, letting him see a fraction of the gratitude she felt. As she walked back to the boarding house, she found herself thinking about Harrison in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. She had not come to Gila Bend looking for romance. In fact, romance was the last thing she wanted after narrowly escaping a forced marriage. But there was something about Harrison that drew her in spite of herself, something steady and real that made her want to lower her guard. The days began to settle into a pattern. Violet took her meals at the boarding house, helped Mrs. Chen with small tasks to earn her keep, and spent her afternoons exploring the town or visiting Ruby at the livery. And if those visits to the livery coincided with times when Harrison was likely to be there, well, that was nobody's business but her own. Harrison, for his part, seemed equally drawn to her. He would pause in his work when she arrived, always ready with a smile and a conversation. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts while carefully avoiding the painful details that had driven them both westward. Violet learned that Harrison had a younger sister he worried about, still trapped in Boston under their father's thumb. Harrison learned that Violet loved books and music, that she had taught herself to read Latin from her mother's old school books, that she dreamed of someday having a garden where she could grow roses. It was easy to be with him, easier than Violet had ever found it to be with anyone else. Harrison did not demand anything from her, did not push her to reveal more than she was ready to share. He simply existed beside her, solid and patient, and slowly, almost without realizing it, Violet began to trust him. 3 weeks into her stay in Gila Bend, everything changed. Violet was in her room at the boarding house, reading a book she had borrowed from Abigail, when she heard raised voices downstairs. Her first instinct was to hide, to barricade herself in the room and prepare for the worst. But curiosity got the better of her, and she crept to the top of the stairs to listen. "I am telling you, she is not here." That was Mrs. Chen, her voice sharp with indignation. "I do not know anyone by that description, and I do not appreciate you coming into my house making accusations. We have reason to believe she came through this area." The second voice was male, unfamiliar with the flat authority of someone used to being obeyed. Young woman, early 20s, dark hair, traveling alone. She stole a considerable sum of money from her family in St. Louis, and there will be a reward for anyone who helps us find her. Violet's blood ran cold. They had found her. Somehow, despite all her precautions, they had tracked her to Gila Bend. She needed to run, needed to get to Ruby and ride out before they could catch her. But even as the thought formed, she knew it was too late. If they were already here, asking questions, watching the town, she would never make it to the livery without being seen. She retreated to her room and began frantically packing her few belongings, her hands shaking so badly that she could barely fasten the buckles on her saddlebags. She was shoving her spare clothes into the bag when there was a soft knock on her door. "Violet, it is Abigail. May I come in?" Violet opened the door a crack, her heart hammering. Abigail slipped inside and closed the door behind her, her expression grave. "There are men downstairs looking for someone," Abigail said quietly. "From what they are describing, I think they might be looking for you." Violet could not speak, could only nod, her worst fears confirmed. Mrs. Chen sent them away, told them she had not seen anyone matching that description. But they will be asking around town, and someone will eventually mention the new woman at the boarding house. You do not have much time. "I have to go," Violet said, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "I have to leave now." "Where will you go?" Abigail asked. "If they are watching the roads, you will never make it out of town on horseback." She was right, and Violet knew it. She was trapped, and it was only a matter of time before they found her, unless she could find somewhere to hide, somewhere they would not think to look. "There is someone who might help you," Abigail said slowly. "If you trust him." "Who?" Violet asked, though she already knew the answer. "Harrison. He has a small house behind the livery. You could hide there until these men move on." Violet wanted to refuse, wanted to insist that she could not drag Harrison into her problems. But the alternative was being caught and dragged back to St. Louis, back to her stepfather and a marriage that was little better than slavery. She had come too far to give up now. "All right," she said. "Will you take me to him?" Abigail nodded. "Wait here. I will see if the way is clear." She slipped out, leaving Violet alone with her racing thoughts. This was it, the moment she had been dreading since she left St. Louis. She was going to have to tell Harrison the truth, to admit what she had done and hope that he did not turn her over to the men hunting her. Abigail returned a few minutes later and motioned for Violet to follow. They went down the back stairs, avoiding the front of the house where the men might still be lurking, and slipped out into the alley behind the boarding house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that provided cover as they made their way toward the livery. Harrison was closing up for the night when they arrived, securing the barn doors and banking the fire in the forge. He looked up in surprise when he saw them approaching, and his expression shifted to concern when he saw the fear on Violet's face. "What happened?" he asked, coming toward them immediately. "There are men in town looking for Violet," Abigail said quietly. "She needs help." Harrison's gaze shifted to Violet, searching her face. "Are you in danger?" "Yes," Violet whispered. "I am sorry. I should have told you before, but I was afraid." "Told me what?" Violet took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I ran away from St. Louis, from my stepfather. He was trying to force me into a marriage I did not want, to a man who would have hurt me. So I took money that my mother left me, money he had been keeping from me, and I ran. But he is calling it theft, and he has sent men to bring me back." The words hung in the air between them, and Violet waited for Harrison's expression to change, for him to step back and tell her he wanted nothing to do with a thief. But instead, his jaw tightened and his eyes hardened with something that looked like anger, though she did not think it was directed at her. "How much time do we have?" he asked Abigail. "Not much," Abigail replied. "Mrs. Chen sent them away, but they will be back, and they will be asking questions all over town." Harrison nodded, his mind clearly working through the problem. "All right. Violet, you will stay at my house. It is small, but it is private, and no one will think to look there. Abigail, can you bring her things from the boarding house without attracting attention? I will do my best, Abigail said. Thank you, Violet said, her voice breaking. Both of you, I never meant to put anyone else in danger. You are not the one creating danger, Harrison said firmly. You are just trying to survive. Come on, let me show you where you will be staying. He led her around the back of the livery to a small adobe house she had not noticed before. It was simple but well-maintained, with a covered porch and window boxes that held struggling desert plants. Inside, it was neat and sparse, furnished with the basics but nothing more. There was a main room with a table and chairs, a fireplace, and a small kitchen area. Through a doorway, she could see a bedroom with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt. It is not much, Harrison said, but it is yours for as long as you need it. I cannot take your bed, Violet protested. You can and you will. I can sleep in the barn, I have done it before. You need to stay out of sight until we figure out what to do. Violet sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. I am so sorry, she said again. You have been nothing but kind to me, and now I have brought trouble to your door. Harrison knelt in front of her, his hands resting lightly on the arms of the chair, his eyes level with hers. Listen to me, Violet. You did nothing wrong. Taking back what was yours is not theft, no matter what your stepfather says. And forcing a woman into marriage against her will is a crime, even if the law does not always see it that way. I am not going to let those men take you. The intensity in his voice, the certainty, made something crack open in Violet's chest. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of her choices by herself, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone on her side. Why are you helping me? She asked. You barely know me. Harrison was quiet for a moment, his gaze never leaving hers. Because you deserve help, he said finally. And because I know what it is like to run from a life that does not fit, to choose freedom even when it is terrifying. But also because I care about you, Violet. More than I probably should after such a short time, but there it is. I care what happens to you. Violet felt tears spill over, running down her cheeks before she could stop them. Harrison reached up and gently brushed them away with his thumb, his touch careful, almost reverent. It is going to be all right, he said softly. We will figure this out together. Violet wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that there was a way out of this nightmare that did not end with her being dragged back to St. Louis in chains. But she was so tired of running, so tired of being afraid. For the first time since she left Missouri, she let herself lean on someone else, let herself accept the help that was being offered. Harrison stayed with her until Abigail arrived with her belongings, then reluctantly took his leave to give her some privacy. Lock the door behind me, he instructed. Do not open it for anyone but me or Abigail. I will come check on you in the morning. After he left, Violet did as he asked, securing the door and checking the windows to make sure they were latched. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think. She needed a plan, a way to either evade the men hunting her or convince them to leave Gila Bend without finding her. But her mind was spinning, unable to settle on anything coherent. She lay awake most of the night, listening to every sound outside, jumping at shadows. But nothing happened, and eventually exhaustion claimed her, pulling her into a fitful sleep. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could hear the sounds of Harrison working at the forge. She rose and washed her face in the basin he had left for her, then ventured cautiously to the window to look out. The view was of the desert beyond town, empty and vast, offering both the promise of escape and the threat of exposure. There was a knock on the door, and Harrison's voice called, "Violet, it is me. I brought you some breakfast." She opened the door to find him holding a plate of food and a cup of coffee. He looked tired, as though he had not slept much either, but his smile was warm as he handed her the meal. "Any news?" she asked, taking the plate. "The men are still in town," Harrison said, his expression darkening. "They have been asking around, showing people a sketch. Apparently, your stepfather hired a private detective agency to track you down." Violet's stomach turned. A detective agency. That meant they had resources, experience, connections. They would not give up easily. "What does the sketch look like?" she asked. "Not much like you, honestly," Harrison said. "They have you with lighter hair and older features. Mrs. Chen saw it and said it could be half the women in Arizona territory. But that does not mean they will not figure it out eventually." "Maybe I should just leave," Violet said. "Take Ruby and head deeper into the territory, somewhere they will not think to look." "And go where?" Harrison asked. "How long can you keep running, Violet? You need a more permanent solution." "Like what?" "They are not going to just give up and go home." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "There might be another way, a legal way to make sure they cannot take you back." "What do you mean?" "If you were married, your stepfather would have no legal claim on you anymore. Your husband would be your legal guardian, and unless they can prove you committed a crime, they would have no grounds to force you to return to St. Louis." Violet stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You are suggesting I marry someone who? Where would I even find someone willing to do that on such short notice?" Harrison met her eyes, his expression serious. "Me. I am suggesting you marry me." The words seemed to echo in the small room, impossible, and yet somehow exactly right. Violet opened her mouth to protest, to tell him that was ridiculous, that he could not possibly be serious. But the look on his face stopped her. He was completely serious. "Harrison, that is crazy," she said finally. "You cannot marry someone you have only known for a few weeks." "People have married for less out here," Harrison said. "Mail-order brides, marriages of convenience, arrangements between families. At least we actually like each other. At least we are choosing this. But you would be tied to me for the rest of your life. What if you meet someone you actually love?" Harrison stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Violet, I am not proposing a marriage of convenience. I am proposing a real marriage, because I already care about you more than I have ever cared about anyone. I know it is fast, and I know it is not how these things usually happen, but nothing about our situation is usual. I am offering you protection, yes, but I am also offering you a future if you want it. A future with me, here in Gila Bend, building something together." Violet felt like she could not breathe. This was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. And yet, a part of her was already reaching for it, already imagining what it would be like to say yes, to have someone like Harrison as a partner, a protector, a husband. "I do not want you to do this out of pity," she said quietly. "This is not pity," Harrison said. "This is me taking a chance on something I think could be really good, if we let it. I cannot promise it will be easy, and I cannot promise I will always know the right thing to say or do. But I can promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy, to keep you safe, to be the kind of husband you deserve." Violet felt the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. She had been so focused on running, on surviving, that she had not let herself imagine a future that involved trusting someone, loving someone. But here was Harrison, offering her exactly that, and she found she wanted it more than she had wanted anything in a long time. "Yes," she said, the word barely a whisper. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Harrison's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Violet let herself sink into the embrace, feeling safe for the first time in months. "We will have to do it quickly," Harrison said, his voice muffled against her hair. "Today, if possible. The longer we wait, the more risk there is that those men will find you." Violet nodded against his chest. "How do we do it?" Gila Bend has a justice of the peace. "Judge Whitman can perform the ceremony. I will go talk to him this morning, see if he can fit us in this afternoon. In the meantime, you stay here, out of sight." It all happened so quickly after that, like a whirlwind that picked Violet up and carried her along. Harrison left to make the arrangements, and Abigail came by with a dress she insisted Violet borrow for the ceremony. A simple but pretty blue cotton that fit reasonably well with a few quick alterations. Mrs. Chen sent over a small bouquet of desert flowers, their hardy beauty a perfect match for the landscape that had become Violet's refuge. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Judge Whitman agreed to perform the ceremony at his home, with Abigail and a rancher named Tom Callahan serving as witnesses. Harrison came to collect Violet just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He looked handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed, his expression both nervous and determined. When he saw Violet in the blue dress, his breath caught audibly. "You look beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you," Violet replied, smoothing the skirt self-consciously. "Are you sure about this, Harrison? There is still time to change your mind." "I have never been more sure of anything," Harrison said, offering her his arm. "Come on, let us go make this official." They walked through the back streets to avoid drawing attention, arriving at Judge Whitman's house just as the last rays of sunlight were fading. The judge was an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He had laid out the legal documents on his dining table, and after verifying that both Violet and Harrison understood what they were agreeing to, he began the ceremony. It was simple and quick, none of the elaborate ritual that Violet had sometimes imagined as a girl dreaming of her wedding day. But there was something profound about the straightforwardness of it, the way Harrison looked into her eyes as he spoke his vows, promising to honor and protect her, to be faithful and true. When it was Violet's turn, her voice trembled but did not break as she made the same promises, binding herself to this man, who had shown her more kindness in a few weeks than she had known in years. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Whitman said. "Mr. Xavier, you may kiss your bride." Harrison cupped Violet's face gently in his hands and kissed her soft and sweet, a kiss full of promise and hope. Violet felt something shift inside her, something that had been locked away for too long finally opening, allowing light to flood in. Abigail hugged them both, tears in her eyes. "I am so happy for you," she said. "You make a wonderful couple." Judge Whitman handed Harrison the marriage certificate, properly signed and witnessed. "Keep this safe," he advised. "If anyone questions the validity of your marriage, this will be your proof." They thanked the judge and walked back to Harrison's house, to their house now, as the desert night settled around them. Violet felt like she was moving through a dream, everything slightly unreal, her life transformed in the space of a few hours. Inside, Harrison lit the lamps and turned to face her, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know this is not what you planned," he said. "And I do not want to pressure you into anything you are not ready for. I can still sleep in the barn, give you time to adjust." Violet took a breath, gathering her courage. This man had just married her to protect her, had offered her his name and his home without asking for anything in return. But the truth was, she did not want him to sleep in the barn. She wanted him here, wanted to begin building the life they had just promised each other. "Stay," she said quietly. "Please, I want you to stay." Harrison crossed the room to her, moving slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Violet did not want to change her mind. She reached up and pulled him down to kiss her, putting into the kiss all the gratitude and affection and hope she felt. Harrison responded in kind, his arms coming around her, holding her close but gently, as though she were something precious. They took their time learning each other, discovering the shape of this new relationship in the quiet privacy of their home. There was tenderness and care in the way Harrison touched her, an awareness that she had been hurt and needed patience. And there was a growing warmth in Violet, a desire that surprised her with its intensity, as she realized that she truly did want this, wanted him, wanted the future they were beginning to build together. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Harrison's arm around her, Violet felt something she had not experienced in years: peace. The men hunting her were still in town, still a threat, but for the first time since leaving St. Louis, she did not feel alone in facing that threat. She had a partner now, someone who had chosen to stand beside her, and that made all the difference. The next morning, Harrison went into town to make discreet inquiries about the detectives. He returned with news that was both good and bad. The men were still asking questions, but they were getting frustrated with the lack of leads. Several people had mentioned the new woman at the boarding house, but when the detectives went to ask about her, Mrs. Chen had truthfully told them that Violet was no longer staying there. She had moved out, Mrs. Chen said, to stay with relatives further south. The detectives seemed to believe her, but they were not leaving town yet. "We need to be patient," Harrison said. "Eventually they will run out of money or leads and they will move on. In the meantime, you are safe here." Violet wanted to believe him, but she could not shake the feeling that danger was still circling, waiting for a moment of carelessness. She stayed inside as much as possible, venturing out only early in the morning or late in the evening when the streets were empty. It was a strange, suspended existence, like holding her breath and waiting for something to happen. 3 days after the wedding, that something came. Harrison had gone to the general store to buy supplies, leaving Violet alone in the house. She was reading, trying to distract herself from worry when she heard voices outside. Male voices, unfamiliar, asking questions. "We are looking for a woman who might have come through here a few weeks ago. Dark hair, early 20s, might have been traveling alone." Violet froze, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. They were right outside. If they knocked on the door, if they demanded to search the house, there was nowhere for her to hide. Have not seen anyone like that. That was Harrison, his voice calm but with an edge of steel underneath. "Like I told you yesterday at the livery, I keep to myself mostly. Do not pay much attention to who comes and goes in town. This woman is a criminal," one of the detectives said. "Stole a substantial amount of money from her family. There is a reward for information leading to her capture." "Well, I wish I could help you," Harrison said, "but I do not know anything about it. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. You live here alone?" The other detective asked, his tone suspicious. Violet's breath stopped. This was it. They were going to search the house and she was going to be found. "No," Harrison said, and Violet could hear the slight challenge in his voice. "I live here with my wife. We were just married a few days ago." There was a pause. Then one of the detectives said, "Your wife. How long have you known her?" "Long enough to know I wanted to spend my life with her," Harrison replied. "We have been courting for several months. She moved to Gila Bend last spring to work as a seamstress." The lie was so smooth, so confident that Violet almost believed it herself. She held her breath, waiting to see if the detectives would accept it. "We would like to meet her," one of the men said. "Just to confirm her identity, you understand." "She is resting right now," Harrison said. "Not feeling well, but I can show you our marriage certificate if you need proof." There was the sound of paper rustling and then a long silence. Finally, one of the detectives said, "This appears to be in order. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Xavier. We are just trying to do our job." "I understand," Harrison said. "I hope you find who you are looking for." Violet listened to the sound of footsteps retreating, and only when she heard the door open and close did she dare to breathe again. Harrison came into the bedroom, his expression tight with controlled anger. "They are getting desperate," he said. "That is good and bad. Good because it means they are running out of leads. Bad because desperate men make mistakes, and those mistakes can be dangerous." "They believed you," Violet said, relief making her voice shake. "About us being married." "The marriage certificate helped," Harrison said, "but they are suspicious. We need to be very careful for the next few days." Violet nodded, but she was tired of being careful, tired of hiding. She wanted her life back, wanted to be able to walk down the street without fear, to start building a future with Harrison without constantly looking over her shoulder. That night, as they lay in bed, Harrison said quietly, "Tell me about your stepfather. What kind of man is he?" Violet stiffened, not wanting to revisit that part of her life. But Harrison deserved to know, deserved to understand what they were up against. "His name is Marcus Kerrigan," she said. "He married my mother when I was 15. She was a widow, struggling to make ends meet, and he seemed like an answer to prayer. He was wealthy, respectable, promised to take care of both of us. And at first he did. But after my mother died, everything changed. He became controlling, cruel. He went through her things and found bonds and cash she had hidden away, money that was supposed to be mine when I turned 21. He claimed it was his by right of marriage, locked it away where I could not access it." "That is theft," Harrison said, anger coloring his voice. "I know. But I could not prove it. He had all the legal documents, all the power. When I turned 21 and demanded what was mine, he told me I could have it as soon as I married his business partner, a man named Gerald Thorpe. He said it would be a good match, that Thorpe would take care of me. But I had heard stories about Thorpe, about how his first wife died under mysterious circumstances, about how he had a temper. I refused. And he forced you," he tried. "He set a wedding date, ordered the dress, sent out invitations. I told him I would not go through with it, and he locked me in my room, said I would stay there until I came to my senses. So I broke the window, climbed down the trellis, and took what was rightfully mine from his safe. Then I ran." Harrison pulled her closer. "You did the right thing," he said fiercely. "No one has the right to force you into anything, especially not marriage, and that money was yours." "But the law does not see it that way," Violet said. "As far as the law is concerned, I stole from my guardian. If they take me back, I will go to jail, or worse, I will be forced to marry Thorpe anyway to avoid scandal." "That is not going to happen," Harrison said. "I will not let it happen." His certainty was comforting, even though Violet knew there were limits to what he could do. But she let herself believe, just for a moment, that everything would be all right, that love and determination would be enough to overcome the forces arrayed against them. The next week was tense, with the detectives still in town, still asking questions. But gradually, their inquiries became less frequent, their presence less noticeable. Harrison heard through the grapevine that they were running low on funds, that the agency they worked for was pressuring them to either produce results or move on to other cases. Finally, 10 days after they had first arrived, the detectives left Gila Bend, heading south toward Tucson. Harrison confirmed their departure himself, watching from a distance as they boarded the stagecoach, their luggage strapped to the roof. "They are gone," he told Violet when he returned home. "You are safe." Violet wanted to believe him, but she could not quite let go of the fear. "What if they come back? What if they figure out who I am?" "Then we will deal with it," Harrison said. "But Violet, you cannot live your whole life in fear. At some point, you have to trust that you have done enough, that you are safe enough, and start actually living. He was right, and Violet knew it. She had been given a second chance, a new life in a new place with a man who loved her. It was time to stop running and start building something real. Slowly, carefully, Violet began to emerge from hiding. She started helping Harrison with the books for the livery, her neat handwriting and head for figures making quick work of the disorganized ledgers he had been keeping. She befriended the other women in town, going to church on Sundays and helping with the occasional quilting bee or charity drive. And she let herself be known as Mrs. Harrison Xavier, the blacksmith's wife, a woman with a mysterious past perhaps, but a respectable present. The people of Gila Bend accepted her, as they had accepted so many others who had come west seeking a fresh start. No one pressed her for details about her life before Arizona, and in return, Violet threw herself into becoming a part of the community. She started a small garden behind the house, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the stubborn desert soil. She sewed curtains for the windows and a new quilt for their bed. She learned to cook the simple, hearty meals that suited the climate and their budget. And through it all, her relationship with Harrison deepened and grew. What had started as a marriage of convenience, a legal protection, blossomed into something real and beautiful. Harrison was everything her stepfather had not been, kind where Marcus had been cruel, patient where Marcus had been demanding, supportive where Marcus had been controlling. With Harrison, Violet felt like she could breathe, like she could be herself without fear of punishment or judgment. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies that make up a life together. Harrison learned that Violet liked her coffee strong and her mornings quiet. Violet learned that Harrison sang while he worked, old songs his mother had taught him, his voice rough but sincere. They discovered shared passions, a love of reading, a fascination with the desert landscape, a commitment to building something lasting in this harsh but beautiful place. 6 months after their wedding, Violet realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complicated mix of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the thought of bringing a child into the world when her own future was still so uncertain was frightening. She put off telling Harrison for a week, trying to decide how she felt, what she wanted. But Harrison noticed the change in her, the way she tired more easily, the slight queasiness that plagued her in the mornings. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the desert, he took her hand and said gently, "Violet, are you going to tell me, or do I have to guess?" She looked at him, this man who had become her anchor, her home, and felt the fear ease slightly. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. "We are going to have a baby." The smile that spread across Harrison's face was incandescent. "Really, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." "But yes, I am fairly certain." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "This is wonderful," he said. "Scary, but wonderful. We are going to be parents, Violet." His joy was infectious, and Violet felt her own happiness rising to match it. Maybe this would be all right. Maybe they could do this, build a family, create a life that was good and safe and full of love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the harsh conditions and limited medical care. The doctor in Gila Bend, an older man named Dr. Patterson, examined Violet and pronounced her healthy and strong, likely to have an uncomplicated birth. The women of the town rallied around her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, helping her prepare for the arrival of the child. Harrison was attentive and protective, almost to a fault. He hovered, constantly asking if she needed anything, worrying about every little ache or pain. Violet found it both endearing and exasperating, but she understood the fear beneath it. This baby represented their future, the life they were building together, and Harrison wanted to protect that with everything he had. On a cold night in February of 1879, Violet went into labor. Harrison fetched Dr. Patterson and Mrs. Chen, then paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal while the women worked. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Violet thought she could not do it, could not push through the pain. But Mrs. Chen held her hand and murmured encouragement, and Dr. Patterson guided her through each contraction, and finally, just as dawn was breaking, Violet gave birth to a son. The baby was small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly, announcing his arrival with a robust cry. Dr. Patterson placed the baby in Violet's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face, feeling a rush of love so intense it nearly stopped her heart. Harrison was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with tears streaming down his face. "A son," he whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Violet asked, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. Harrison looked at her, his eyes full of love and wonder. "What about Henry, after my grandfather? He was the one person in my family who understood me, who supported my decision to come west." "Henry Xavier," Violet said, trying it out. "I like it. Hello, Henry. Welcome to the world." The baby opened his eyes, dark blue like all newborns, and seemed to study his parents with solemn intensity. Violet felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. This child would never know fear the way she had. This child would grow up surrounded by love and safety, free to become whoever he wanted to be. The months that followed were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Henry was a good baby, healthy and curious, quick to smile. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, rising in the middle of the night to walk a fussy Henry so Violet could sleep, singing silly songs to make the baby laugh, fashioning a cradle with his own hands from smooth, polished wood. Violet watched her husband with their son and felt her love for him deepen in ways she had not imagined possible. This was what family was supposed to be, she realized. Not the cold, controlling environment she had grown up in after her mother's death, but this warm, messy, beautiful tangle of love and laughter, and occasional tears. When Henry was 6 months old, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was addressed to Violet, forwarded through a series of channels, and the handwriting on the envelope made her hands shake. She knew that handwriting. It belonged to her stepfather's attorney. She almost threw the letter away unopened, but Harrison convinced her to read it. "You need to know what it says," he argued gently. "Otherwise, you will always wonder." So Violet opened the letter, her heart pounding, and read the contents with growing disbelief. Marcus Kerrigan was dead, the letter informed her. He had suffered a stroke 3 months prior and passed away without regaining consciousness. As his stepdaughter, she was entitled to a portion of his estate, specifically the bonds and cash that had belonged to her mother. The attorney requested that she contact him at her earliest convenience to arrange for the transfer of funds. Violet read the letter 3 times before she could fully process it. Marcus was dead. The man who had controlled and terrorized her, who had sent detectives chasing her across the country, was gone. She was free, truly free, in a way she had not allowed herself to believe was possible. "He is dead," she said to Harrison, her voice strange in her own ears. "Marcus is dead, and they are giving me the money, my mother's money." Harrison read the letter himself, then pulled Violet into his arms. "It is over," he said. "Really over. You do not have to be afraid anymore." Violet sagged against him, relief and grief and a dozen other emotions washing over her in waves. She had hated Marcus for what he had done, but he had still been a part of her life, a shadow she could not escape. Now that shadow was gone, and she did not quite know how to feel about it. Over the following weeks, Violet corresponded with the attorney and arranged for the money to be transferred to a bank in Tucson. It was a substantial sum, more than she had realized, enough to make a real difference in their lives. She and Harrison discussed carefully what to do with it. "We could expand the livery," Harrison suggested. "Build a proper stable, maybe hire some help, or we could use it to buy land, start a ranch." But Violet had a different idea. "What if we use some of it to help other people," she said, "women like me who need to escape bad situations. We could set up a fund, work with the church, provide resources for women who have nowhere else to go." Harrison looked at her with such pride and love that it made her throat tight. "That is a wonderful idea," he said. "We can do both, use some for ourselves, some to help others." And that was what they did. They expanded the livery, turning it into one of the most successful businesses in Gila Bend. They bought a small piece of land and built a larger house, with room for more children and the family they hoped to grow. And they established a fund through the church to help women in desperate circumstances, providing money for travel, legal assistance, and temporary housing. Violet threw herself into the work, finding purpose and healing in helping others the way she had been helped. She became known throughout the territory as someone who could be trusted, someone who would listen without judgment and help without asking too many questions. Harrison supported her completely, proud of the difference she was making, proud of the woman she had become. 2 years after Henry was born, Violet gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Violet's mother. Rose had Violet's dark hair and Harrison's golden eyes, and from the moment she arrived, she was a force of nature, strong-willed and fearless. Henry adored his little sister, appointing himself her protector and playmate. Life in Gila Bend settled into a comfortable rhythm. The years passed, marked by the milestones of their children growing up, the expansion of their businesses, the deepening of their roots in the community. Violet never forgot where she had come from, never forgot the fear and desperation that had driven her west, but those memories became softer with time, less painful, transformed into lessons she could share with others who were struggling. Harrison's livery became the largest in the territory, known for quality work and fair prices. He trained young men in the skills of blacksmithing and horseshoeing, passing on knowledge the way his grandfather had passed it on to him. And every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, he came home to Violet and their children, bringing with him the steadiness and love that had saved her all those years ago. When Henry was 10 and Rose was 8, they added another member to the family, a son they named Thomas. And 3 years after that, another daughter, Margaret. The house was full of noise and laughter, the controlled chaos of a large and happy family. Violet sometimes looked around at the life she had built and could hardly believe it was real, that this was her life now, so different from the lonely, frightened existence she had known in St. Louis. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Violet out to the desert at sunset, to a spot they had discovered years before, a place where the rocks formed a natural shelter and the view stretched for miles. They sat together, watching the sky turn colors no painter could quite capture, and Harrison took her hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me that day, tying yourself to this place?" Violet turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway. His face showed the passage of time, lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, threads of gray in his dark hair. But he was still the same Harrison who had offered her help when she needed it most, still the same man who had promised to build a future with her. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "You gave me my life back, Harrison. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I did not think I deserved it. How could I ever regret that?" Harrison smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had first made her feel safe all those years ago. "You gave me just as much," he said. "You gave me someone to share my life with, someone who understands what it means to choose your own path. You made me a better man, Violet, a better person." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The desert at night was a different world, vast and mysterious, full of possibilities. It was the perfect metaphor for the life they had built together, Violet thought. A life carved out of harsh circumstances, beautiful in its simplicity and strength. "I love you," Violet said, the words she spoke every day but which never felt like enough to express what she felt. "I love you too," Harrison replied, pulling her close. "Always have, always will." As they sat there under the Arizona stars, Violet thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The fear and desperation that had driven her from St. Louis. The courage it had taken to keep running when it would have been easier to give up. The leap of faith required to trust Harrison, to accept his proposal, to build a life with a man she barely knew. Every choice had led her here, to this perfect moment, and she would not change a single thing. The past had shaped her, but it did not define her. She was Violet Xavier now, wife, mother, businesswoman, advocate for those who needed help. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and she had found exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's skill with horses and his mother's compassion for those in need. Rose became a teacher, following in Abigail's footsteps, educating the children of Gila Bend with patience and creativity. Thomas developed a talent for numbers and began helping manage the financial side of the family businesses. And Margaret, the youngest, showed signs of becoming an artist, filling notebooks with sketches of the desert landscape she loved. Violet and Harrison watched their children grow with pride and occasional heartache, knowing that each step toward independence was a step away from the childhood that had passed so quickly. But they also knew that they had given their children the greatest gift they could, a foundation of love and security that would carry them through whatever challenges life brought. The fund they had established to help women in need grew over the years, aided by donations from other families in the territory who believed in the cause. Violet personally helped dozens of women find safety and new beginnings, and each one reminded her of her own journey, of the grace she had been given when she needed it most. On a warm spring day in 1895, 17 years after that hasty wedding in Judge Whitman's dining room, Violet and Harrison stood together at the dedication of a new building in Gila Bend. It was a shelter for women and children escaping dangerous situations, funded by the foundation they had started and supported by the community they had helped build. The sign over the door read Rose House, named for Violet's mother and their daughter, a tribute to the women who had shaped Violet's life. As the ribbon was cut and the first residents moved in, Violet felt tears streaming down her face. This was what her suffering had been for, she realized. This was how she could transform the pain of her past into something beautiful and useful. By helping others, she honored the memory of her mother and the courage it had taken to run. By building something lasting, she ensured that other women would not have to face their darkest moments alone. Harrison put his arm around her, and she leaned into his solid warmth, grateful beyond words for the partnership they had forged. They had built this together, just as they had built everything else in their lives, with love and determination, and an unwavering commitment to each other. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, Surrounded by their grown children and the grandchildren who were beginning to arrive, Violet reflected on the long, winding path that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the frightened young woman who had ridden into Gila Bend all those years ago, desperate and alone. She thought about the cowboy who had offered her safety and then so much more. And she thought about the life they had created together, rich with meaning and purpose and love. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, his voice quiet so as not to disturb the conversation happening around them. "Everything," Violet said. "How far we have come. How grateful I am for every moment, even the hard ones, because they led me here to you, to this life." Harrison squeezed her hand. "Do you remember that first day when you rode into town looking like you were being chased by demons?" Violet laughed softly. "I was being chased by demons in a way, just not the kind you can see." "I knew right then that you were going to be important," Harrison said. "I did not know how, but I knew. There was something about you, a strength underneath the fear that called to me. And I knew you were someone I could trust," Violet replied. "Even when I was too scared to trust anyone. You made me feel safe." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their family, listening to the laughter and conversation that filled the evening air. This was everything Violet had never dared to dream of back in those dark days in St. Louis. A family of her own choosing. A home built on love instead of control. A community that valued her for who she was, not for what she could provide. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Violet sent up a silent prayer of thanks. Thanks for the courage to run when running was the only option. Thanks for the guidance that had led her to Gila Bend. Thanks for Harrison, who had seen past her fear to the woman beneath and loved her anyway. Thanks for the children they had raised and the grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. Thanks for every moment of joy and even the moments of sorrow, because all of it together had created this beautiful, complicated, deeply meaningful life. Harrison turned to her as the last light faded from the sky, his face shadowed but his eyes warm with the love that had never wavered in all their years together. "Happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Violet replied, and it was nothing less than the truth. The desert night settled around them, vast and full of stars, and Violet felt a profound sense of peace. She had run from her past and found a future worth staying for. She had taken a chance on a cowboy who offered her protection and discovered a love that transformed everything. And in the process, she had become the woman she was always meant to be, strong and compassionate, fierce in defending those she loved, generous in sharing the blessings she had received. This was her story, and it was a good one. A story of courage and hope, of love found in the most unexpected places, of a life built from the ashes of fear into something beautiful and enduring. And as she sat there with Harrison's hand in hers, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped build, Violet knew with absolute certainty that every hard mile of the journey had been worth it. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes that time brings to all lives. Some were joyful, the marriages of their children and the arrival of more grandchildren, each one a precious gift. Some were harder, the loss of friends and the creeping awareness of their own mortality. But through it all, Violet and Harrison faced each challenge together, their bond strengthened by decades of shared experience and unwavering commitment. When Harrison turned 60, he began to slow down, his body finally showing the effects of years of hard physical labor. He trained his sons and a couple of promising young men to take over the more demanding aspects of running the livery, though he still spent every day at the shop, unable to fully let go of the work that had defined so much of his life. Violet, too, began to step back from the day-to-day operations of Rowe's house, though she remained active on the board and continued to personally counsel women who sought her help. Her reputation had spread far beyond Gila Bend, and she received letters from across the territory, women thanking her for the help they had received or asking for advice on starting similar programs in their own communities. On a quiet afternoon in the spring of 1905, Violet and Harrison celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with a small gathering of family and close friends. The house was full of people. 3 generations gathered to honor the couple whose love had created this extended family. There were toasts and stories, laughter and tears, and through it all, Violet kept catching Harrison's eye across the room, sharing private smiles that spoke of inside jokes and shared memories that no one else could fully understand. Later, when the guests had gone home and the house was quiet again, they walked together to their favorite spot in the desert, moving more slowly than they once had but still drawn to that place where they had shared so many important conversations. The sunset was particularly spectacular, the sky ablaze with color, and they sat on the smooth rock that had become their unofficial bench, watching the light show nature provided. 27 years, Harrison said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean, Violet agreed. I can barely remember what my life was like before you. It is like that was a different person, someone I used to know but do not really understand anymore. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come to Gila Bend? Harrison asked. If you had chosen a different town, a different direction? Violet considered the question seriously. Sometimes, she admitted, but I do not think it would have turned out as well. There was something about this place, about you, that was exactly what I needed at exactly the right moment. I do not believe in fate exactly, but I do think some things are meant to be. I am glad you came here, Harrison said simply. Glad you trusted me enough to stay. You have made my life so much richer than I ever imagined it could be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to emerge as the sky darkened. Violet thought about all the conversations they had had in this spot over the years, all the decisions made, all the dreams shared. This place held so many memories, was so deeply woven into the fabric of their life together. I want you to know something, Violet said suddenly, urgently, as though the words had been building inside her and could no longer be contained. If I had it all to do over again, if I could go back to that day I rode into Gila Bend, I would not change a single thing. Every moment of fear, every hard decision, every sacrifice, it was all worth it to have this life with you. Harrison turned to her, and even in the fading light, she could see the emotion in his eyes. That is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me, he said, his voice rough. And I feel exactly the same way. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Violet Xavier. The absolute best thing. They kissed then, softly, sweetly, a kiss that held 27 years of love and commitment and partnership. And when they finally pulled apart, Violet rested her head on Harrison's shoulder and looked up at the stars, feeling at peace with the world and her place in it. The next few years passed quietly, marked by the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Henry took over full operation of the livery and blacksmith shop, running it with the same integrity and skill his father had shown. Rose expanded the school, adding new programs and advocating tirelessly for better education opportunities for all children in the territory. Thomas started a small bank, using the financial acumen he had developed to help families in the area manage their money and plan for the future. And Margaret opened a gallery in Tucson, showcasing not only her own work, but that of other artists from across the Southwest. Violet and Harrison watched their children's successes with enormous pride, knowing that they had given them the foundation to build meaningful lives. And they delighted in their grandchildren, a rowdy, loving bunch who brought noise and laughter to the house every Sunday when the whole family gathered for dinner. On a hot summer day in 1910, Harrison suffered a heart attack while working in the garden. Violet heard him call out and rushed outside to find him collapsed among the tomato plants, his face gray and his breathing labored. She screamed for help, and within minutes, neighbors and family were there, rushing him to the doctor, doing everything they could to save him. Dr. Patterson, now elderly himself and working with a younger partner, did what he could, but the damage to Harrison's heart was severe. He survived, but he was weakened, forced to spend most of his time resting, unable to do the physical work that had always been such a part of his identity. It was hard for both of them, this sudden shift in their lives. Harrison chafed at the restrictions, frustrated by his body's betrayal, and Violet struggled with the fear of losing him, of facing a future without the man who had been her partner for more than 3 decades. But they adapted, as they always had. Violet became Harrison's primary caretaker, managing his medications and making sure he followed the doctor's orders. And Harrison learned to find satisfaction in quieter pursuits, spending hours with his grandchildren, teaching them the skills he could no longer practice himself, sharing stories from his life, and dispensing the wisdom he had accumulated over the years. They had 5 more years together, years that were precious precisely because they knew how fragile and limited time was. They spent those years loving each other fiercely, saying the things that mattered, creating final memories that would sustain Violet through whatever came after. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool autumn night in 1915, with Violet beside him, holding his hand. She woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, and though her heart shattered, she also felt a strange sense of gratitude. They had been given so much time, so much love, so many good years. Not everyone was that fortunate. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Violet stood dry-eyed through the service, her children surrounding her, drawing strength from the family they had built together. In the days and weeks that followed, Violet learned to navigate life without Harrison. It was hard, harder than she had imagined, because he had been woven into every aspect of her existence. But she was not alone. Her children were attentive and loving, making sure she was cared for. Her grandchildren brought light and laughter into her days. And the community that she and Harrison had helped build rallied around her, offering support and companionship. Violet continued the work she had always done, helping women in need, serving on the board of Rose House, staying active in the church and community. The work gave her purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, and it honored Harrison's memory by continuing the mission they had shared. On what would have been their 37th wedding anniversary, Violet made the journey out to their special spot in the desert. It was harder now, her body no longer as strong as it once was, but she was determined. She sat on the familiar rock and watched the sunset, remembering all the times she and Harrison had sat there together, all the conversations and kisses and quiet moments of connection. "I miss you," she said aloud, speaking to the desert air, to Harrison's memory, to the love that still lived in her heart even though he was gone. "Every single day I miss you, but I want you to know that I am all right. The children are thriving, the grandchildren are beautiful, and the work we started continues. You built something that will last, Harrison. We built it together, and it is your legacy." The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in the colors she had always loved, and Violet felt a sense of peace settle over her. Harrison was gone, but their love remained, embedded in the family they had raised, the community they had helped build, the lives they had touched. That love would continue, passed down through generations, a gift that would keep giving long after she, too, was gone. Violet lived for another 10 years, dying peacefully at the age of 77, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. She had lived a long, full life, rich with meaning and purpose and love. And when they laid her to rest beside Harrison in the cemetery overlooking the desert they had both loved, it felt like completion, like the end of a story that had been beautiful from beginning to end. The family she and Harrison had created continued to thrive, carrying forward the values they had instilled and the love they had modeled. Rose House continued its work, helping countless women find safety and new beginnings. The businesses they had built remained successful, providing employment and services to the community for generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, people would see young couples walking hand in hand to that special spot among the rocks, the place where Violet and Harrison had shared so many precious moments. The story of their love had become legend in Gila Bend, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the darkest moments, that courage and kindness and commitment can transform everything. Violet Kerrigan had run from her past and found a future worth staying for in the arms of a cowboy named Harrison Xavier. Together, they had built a life that mattered, a love that endured, and a legacy that would never be forgotten. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for, to have loved and been loved, to have made a difference, to have lived a life worthy of remembering. The desert kept their secrets and their stories, the rocks and stars bearing silent witness to the love that had flourished in that harsh but beautiful landscape. And somewhere in the vast Arizona sky, two souls rested easy, their journey complete, their love eternal, their story told.